Alright, guys, so we got a pretty cool announcement to talk about here. Since the other day, Hamster Corporation, the company that does the Arcade Archive series, they came out and announced that they are going to be releasing a new line of games called the Console Archives. Which this is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's the Arcade Archives series, except for old console games, as opposed to old arcade games. So, I think this is a pretty cool concept overall. They did say that this line is going to be coming to both Nintendo Switch 2 as well as the PlayStation 5, which both Nintendo and Sony already have their own methods of releasing, their old back catalog of games on their current consoles. However, both of them really have a lot of problems. I think Sony does it better than Nintendo, but it's kind of a low bar at this point. Nintendo, of course, manages everything through their NSO subscription, which I've always hated the concept of, having any kind of subscription based thing like that, since you don't actually own any of those games in any fashion. And at some point far down the road, of course, that subscription's not going to be a thing anymore, and the servers are going to be cut off, and you're not going to have access to that anymore. So I always preferred Nintendo's old method of doing it, from the Wii era through the end of the Wii U 3DS era, where they had the virtual console, where you could just purchase individual old games on there digitally for a few bucks, and then you own actual digital copies of those games. Which PlayStation has been doing it somewhat better than Nintendo has, since at least for most of their old PlayStation Classic games, they do have the option to purchase them individually on the PlayStation Store. I think there might still be a few that are locked to their PlayStation Plus subscription. I can't remember off the top of my head any specific titles. But at least for the most part, I know a lot of their old PS1 and PS2 games they have on there. You can get them for free if you have the subscription, or you can just buy them individually outright. So Sony has done it better generally, at least better than Nintendo has on the Switch and Switch 2 era. But with this new line coming from Hamster, with the console archives, it is going to be very nice to have another outlet in order to be able to get access to some of those old games that you can just have the option to purchase them outright and not have to deal with any subscription nonsense. So, I've always been a fan of Hamster Corporation's work with the Arcade Archives games, and I expect a similar level of quality with these. So, obviously, there'll be some, quality of life upgrades and things like that added to them. But overall, they'll be faithful ports of those old games, and it'll make these titles a lot more just easily accessible on current platforms. You won't have to, jump through a bunch of hoops to deal with emulation or, track down old hardware and old physical copies that may cost a ton of money at this point. So I think that's a really good thing, having access to these games and making them more readily available. Now, as far as which titles are actually going to be included in this lineup, I'll have a link in the description to some Gematsu articles talking about this, and I'll throw the list up on screen as well. But so far, they've confirmed 11 titles for this line, which they got a pretty random assortment of games here that's kind of all over the place. All of these titles are old NES or PS1 games, but they got a pretty wide range of genres and such. They got Ninja Gaiden 2 on there. They got Nobunaga's Ambition. They got an old Monster Rancher game. They've got a few titles that were actually Japan exclusive until now. So they're going to be getting a worldwide release for the first time. So that's really cool as well. Now, I know a few of these titles are actually currently available on those platforms in other forms. I think Ninja Gaiden 2 is on the NSO service, I believe. And I think Cool Borders is one of the games that Sony has in their back catalog that's available for just outright purchase on the PlayStation Store. So some of these are kind of redundant. But as for me personally, I've never actually played any of the games on this list, so I can't speak to the quality of any of these titles specifically. However, I am less excited about these specific games and more excited just about the potential future of this lineup, since we obviously don't know how far they're going to expand this console archives line. But if it's anything like the arcade archives, that line has an absolute shitload of games in it at this point, and they're adding more all the time. And of course, now they also have their Arcade Archives 2 lineup that has, a little bit newer 3D arcade games too. So if they expand this like they've been expanding those Arcade Archives lines, then this console archives thing could end up being a pretty huge list of games. And it'd be really interesting to see what titles get added to this list over time, as well as what platforms we get expanded to. Like I said, this is just for NES and PS1 games right now. But in the future, it'll be interesting to see if we could maybe get some Super Nintendo games, maybe even Nintendo 64. I don't know how new they want to go with this. I don't know if they go into like the PS2 era, but that could be really cool as well. If they don't want to go that new, even some older consoles, maybe some old Atari games, or old stuff like TurboGrafx 16, or maybe possibly some old Sega console games as well. I don't know if they would get Sega to partner with them to get any first party like Sega Genesis stuff or anything on there or not. I know Sega has their own Sega Ages line that they sometimes remember exists. So, I don't know if they'd want to work with them for this and kind of be competing with themselves or whatever. But it'll be interesting to see, what other games from other different platforms we get added to this list. And then, of course, the other big thing that jumped to my mind with this is, could Nintendo themselves get involved and actually get some of the first-party Nintendo games from the past onto this line? Which my gut instinct kind of just tells me no, mostly because Nintendo's been making almost exclusively shitty decisions lately. However, I can't totally rule it out, since Nintendo actually did work with Hamster before on the Arcade Archives line. There is a handful of first-party Nintendo arcade games in that series. I know they've got the arcade version of Donkey Kong on there. They've got Versus, Super Mario Brothers, and a few more titles as well. So I wouldn't hold my breath on it, but it's not totally outside the realm of possibility that maybe Nintendo would let Hamster put some of their first-party stuff in this line. I really hope they would, since that would basically fill the role of the Virtual Console at that point. Just take the stuff that's already on the fucking NSO subscription and just put it in this line and give people the option of being able to buy them individually. If Nintendo won't do the Virtual Console themselves, then just step back and let Hamster do it for them. That would be perfectly okay with me. So, yeah, overall I am excited for the future of this line. It'll be really interesting to see what sort of titles get added to this list. Obviously, there's a lot of old titles from that era, for even if we limit it to just NES and PS1. There's a ton of titles on both those consoles alone that aren't readily available on modern consoles right now. So there's a lot of potential for this line, and I think generally Hamster does a good job with these sorts of things. I know some people complain about the Arcade Archives because of the price or whatever, but I've never really had any issue with them. You can catch those games on sale occasionally. So overall, I think it's a pretty cool thing. So I will be keeping up with this line and seeing what sort of titles get added to it, and hopefully it expands as far as they can possibly expand it. It probably largely depends on, what companies are agreeable enough to partner with Hamster and, let them get the rights to whatever old titles. But hopefully we don't have to jump through too many legal hurdles, and we can get everybody to be real agreeable and expand this as much as possible, since getting these old games in an actually purchasable, ownable format on modern consoles would definitely be a really cool thing. But anyway, I guess that's all I got to say. So, lots of luck to you and yours.